Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. So let's talk a little bit about what survivors of narcissistic relationships really crave. We tend to crave things that our body needs, right? They often believe that if you crave salt, it might be very well that you're lacking that in your diet. We do know, though, that people who experience narcissistic relationships often get lost in the loop of believing that maybe they are asking too much. Part of the rationalizations and justifying and self-blaming, and something that is often floated by the enablers. It's this idea that what people in narcissistic relationships and families want is unreasonable. Usually a person in a narcissistic relationship wants a family or a relationship characterized by kindness, compassion, and listening. The usual nonsense about, well, aren't all families dysfunctional? Or behind those gleaming social media posts of that family, there lies a mess. All families are a mess. And sometimes enablers will even say, what fantasy world do you live in? A family that's nice. Ha! Your family's just giving you straight talk because they love you. It's what families do. Now that sort of rhetoric only doubles down on the idea that what people in these relationships want is unreasonable. I have been doing this work a long time, and I've survived it myself. So I can also weigh in quite personally on what people who have been in narcissistic relationships of any kind really want. People who've been through these relationships, they don't want a fairy tale or a family that wears matching pajamas at the holidays or that finishes each other's sentences. They don't necessarily want or are demanding a family where everyone has loving family meetings and focuses on how they can plan a big, happy family vacation together. You want to know what survivors of narcissistic relationships want? They want normal. That's it. Just normal. You may be thinking, oh, come on now, what really is normal in a family or even in an intimate, close relationship? I can tell you what normal is not. It is not normal to grow up hating yourself or wondering why you aren't enough, or for a child to believe that they are responsible for a parent's feelings, or that a child who wants to just be seen and heard and loved for who they are is being a needy brat. It is not normal to be in a relationship where you walk on eggshells and feel crazy and feel that the only way to get your needs met is to give in on everything. It is not normal to hold back on saying something for fear of being shouted down or gaslighted. It's not normal to watch a parent be manipulated and devalued and broken down by your other parent. None of this is normal. Normal, if I were to speculate, is feeling safe, feeling that you are worth at least being listened to. Normal is respect. Normal is empathy. Normal is being able to say what you need, and maybe the other person can't or won't meet it, but they do not shut you down and tell you that you are selfish or greedy for wanting something basic. Normal is being able to have a normal disagreement where everything is not personalized and you're attacked for just not getting into line with the other person. Normal is people getting along and collaborating and not just one person holding court. But folks, normal, that's all survivors of narcissistic relationships want. And it is not grandiose to want normal. Let me give you a personal example. This whole thing became clear to me some time ago when I was spending some time with some really normal folks. In fact, I would say they were happy, close-knit. They liked spending time together. The parents were happily married for a long time. Everyone in the family engaged in self-care. They had jobs, provided well for themselves. They would do projects together. Again, it was striking to me in terms of how normal and happy they were. Again, I was spending time with them, and as the time passed, initially when I was with them, I was happy for them. As time went on, as the hours ticked by, I felt heavier. Then I felt uncomfortable. And then I felt an overwhelming sense of shame. Don't get me wrong. These people weren't perfect. There were a few little digs here and there. But then, when those digs would happen, the other person in the family would push back in a healthy way, and it all got worked out. Nobody seemed anxious, on edge, hypervigilant. Nobody was contemptuous. When I see families like that, I'm going to be honest with you, it throws me off. I was genuinely happy for them. I really was. But was left with the universal sense of grief of survivors. And one could see it in myself as a craving. I craved normal. I even believe that even one piece of this would have been something that would have undone, I should say, a lot of the ugly inner narratives I'd carry if I'd had some of that normal. But when I left this scenario of spending time with this family, I pondered the lives of clients that I've worked with who've gone through this in their own families, it struck me that when we are popped into these other scenarios of happy, healthy families, of people behaving collaboratively, cooperatively, and supportively, well, I must say it is nice to be in a healthy space where our sympathetic nervous system isn't going off like the 4th of July, and that we just sit there on edge waiting for folks to start fighting, manipulating, and triangulating, because isn't that what families do when they get together? That there was a reminder being with these healthy folks of what was missing, of how much harder life had been for not having these so-called normal spaces, and how that ultimately harmed our psychological insides. The craving for normal, and in fact, I would argue that the folks in that family I observed were a bit more than just normal. I would say they were well above average and thriving. The absence of that is the weight on the shoulders of survivors. And it is not grandiose to want normal, but there is no do-over on childhood. And many people coming out of narcissistic childhoods are not that well provisioned in the tools such as valuing themselves in adult relationships as they need to be. Creating a setup for an act 2 of healthy adult relationships is hard, and many people are doomed to more of the not normal. But when people say, oh, come on, all families are out of their minds and difficult, all relationships are hard, it simply isn't true. Folks who grew up in narcissistic systems and ended up in narcissistic relationships missed out on something, and we experienced something that wasn't good for us. And after being in a narcissistic relationship, normal can feel like a big, warm, cozy, safe bed. And all the fairy tale that any of us ever wanted. No castles or glass slippers or tiaras or fancy vacations. Just regulation, empathy, kindness, and warmth. That craving for normal is so universal for survivors of narcissistic relationships. So many times it gets swatted down, saying, oh gosh, all families are a mess. Be glad you're in this one. Not so much. When you peer around the wall of systems that actually do work, look into the lives of the so-called normal for a minute, and maybe even the happy, heaven forbid. For many survivors, it can be such a complex reaction, because yes, there is joy in seeing a family that works well, but it's a reminder of the tools that were never given or never got to develop, and the lack of safety that survivors have to carry into almost every interpersonal interaction, not to mention the shadows of self-doubt and self-blame that track survivors of narcissistic abuse all the time. Survivors of narcissistic abuse run themselves ragged, trying to be more than enough for everyone, and are absolutely nothing for themselves. One thing that was notable to me in that healthy family system is everyone was very, very good at self-care. Right? When people ask me about my self-care, I tend to look at them like they have 7 heads. I'm like, what are you talking about? For people who grow up in narcissistic systems, engaging in self-care is viewed as hubris, selfishness, greediness. You're not supposed to have needs in those relationships. You're certainly not going to be asked about self-care, and heaven forbid you engage in it. You will be shamed for it. In quote-unquote normal systems, not only does self-care tend to happen organically, it's reveled in and cherished in others. And yet, many survivors of narcissistic abuse feel ashamed that they don't engage in self-care, knowing that it's what you're supposed to do, but there's absolutely no template for it. Pay attention to that craving for normal. It's not grandiose. It's well within reach for many. It can be a heavier, harder journey for folks who've been through narcissistic abuse. But allow it to guide you, because it's something that we all deserve. There's, again, nothing over the top about it. But to that point that we tend to crave the things that we never got, it is no wonder that survivors of narcissistic abuse desperately crave normal. Thanks again.